A lot has been made about the start to Nick Dacos's current 50-game career of AFL football, to the extent where the mainstream footy media can't help themselves every time he takes the field. It's so over-exaggerated that AFL.com.au journalist Cal Toomey wrote an article this past week proclaiming his first 2 seasons of footy are the best first 49 games of all time. Now, there's no doubt that the kid can play, and he has been both a rising star and has a premiership in the bag before turning 21. But we need to be realistic here and not forget that there's been a hell of a lot of great footballers who've dominated the game early on in their careers and beyond. Anyway, this is not a Collingwood podcast, it's a Fitzroy one, and the Mighty Roys had a player long before the vast majority of us were born who had, in my opinion, the most amazing start to an elite football career the nation has seen. I'm talking about the great Haydn Bunton Sr.
I'm a lion through and through, in my golden red and blue, and we'll fight until we get right to the top. Games at home or games away, any time or any day, we will go, go, go until we drop. Come on, Fitzroy! Come on, Fitzroy! You can do it, hear the call. When that final siren sounds, we'll all cheer around the ground, for Fitzroy, the greatest team of all.
Both of my grandfathers were lucky enough to see Bunton play footy in his prime. One was a die-hard Fitzroy supporter, and the other one, unfortunately, an Essendon man. However, one of the few things they agreed on was that Haydn Bunton was the best footballer they'd ever seen. So, who was this superhero of the 1930s, and how good was he really? To answer this question, firstly, we have to travel back in time to the Murray River town of Albury in the 1920s, where young Bunton started his football career of sorts. The son of Edward Bunton and Matilda Lewis made a name for himself early on in his teens, not just in football but in many sports, where he regularly played at a level above everyone else. Opponents in Aussie rules, cricket, swimming and athletics would often sigh when they found out young Bunton was set to compete against them. Quite often set incredible records in those and other sports, excelling in pretty much everything he tried his hand to. Something a lot of people may not know is that he almost chose cricket as his number one sport. And based on the stats, he could have possibly made it to the national side. By his mid-teens, he was regularly averaging 100 with the bat for each season he played, and found himself playing at representative level often, including a game in 1928 where he scored 144 and featured in a 280-run partnership. He was only 17 by that stage and was being courted by district clubs in his native New South Wales and Victoria. Ultimately, though, he chose football, even though he did play 25 first 11 games with Fitzroy Cricket Club with a top score of 104 against Paran. So, Bunton's older brother Cleaver was a prominent country footballer himself as well, just as coincidentally. And he has an award named in his honour in the Ovens and Murray Football League, which is quite an achievement. That's a really strong football competition where some great AFL, VFL and so forth, good country footballers as well have come from. So anyway, back to Haydn, and he began his football journey at the age of 12 in 1923. And at this period in history, Australia had come out the other end of the First World War and the Spanish flu pandemic, and many of our best men were taken long before their time was due, particularly in country regions. So there weren't a lot of really good, strong, powerful athletes around. A lot of them had been lost to the war, to the pandemic, and the poverty that preceded both of those two things as well. Bunton and another similarly aged cricketer by the name of Bradman, you may have heard of him, were dominating against older opponents at the time in their respective sports, just when young heroes were needed to restore some hope for the future. And both would go on, along with a horse called Farlap, to provide the Australian public with a large amount of joy in the middle of the Great Depression a few years later. Bradman and Bunton also played a representative cricket match alongside each other, something I don't think too many people actually in this day and age know about. And that would have been a sight to see, because even as 12 and 13-year-olds. They were both already on the verge of becoming superstars in their own right. Hard to believe someone that young could be, but they were both that good. In the meantime, while representing the Albury Rovers, Bunton won Best and Fairest awards twice at junior level and a further 3 more times at senior level by the time he was 17. He also played in 4 winning senior grand finals in a row from 1926 to 1929, being named best on ground in all 4, and began to come to notice of recruiters in the VFL. So my maternal grandfather used to tell me how Fitzroy had been a glamour club of the first few decades of the VFL, winning 7 of their 8 premierships within the first 25 seasons of the competition. And on top of that, they'd previously won a flag in the Victorian Football Association, which I think was 1885. This level of success attracted his branch of my family to the club, and in his eyes, he believed it was what made the club so appealing to the ultra-competitive young superstar Bunton when other clubs were courting him. And really, I mean, let's face it, no doubt the payment of £222, which is more than $20,000 in today's money, that Fitzroy made to him was a very nice incentive. But what that did do, unfortunately, was cause a massive controversy when the VFL hierarchy became aware. Sign-on bonuses were illegal under VFL rules at the time, and according to the league, and they disqualified Bunton for 12 months from representing Fitzroy. And lots of appeals were made and an explanation given that it was in fact a payment to help pay for surgery on an injured knee, although I do believe he injured that knee in 1930 after he'd received the money. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he played for my football club, and yeah, it screwed the VFL. So ultimately, though, the appeals fell on deaf ears, and he went out and scored a 5th premiership in a row as captain coach of West Albury. Hard to believe he's entrusted such a position at the age of 19, but he was just that good that there was no other choice. And as I said earlier, there weren't a lot of, I guess, strong leaders and powerful young men in their 20s and 30s around due to the war and the pandemic. So once Bunton was able to run out in the maroon and blue jumper for the 1931 season, and still only 19 years of age for the majority of it, he wasted no time making up for what he'd missed with his debut match against Melbourne, where he kicked a goal. Although he wasn't able to, at that stage, help the Royals get a win on the board, he did play extremely well. And his impact on the VFL was immediate. It was delighting spectators of his superior fitness and amazing skill level. And he was said by a lot of people, including my maternal grandfather, to have been a long way ahead of his time with his use of handball and non-stop running. I think they call it gut running these days. You can call it what you will. And at 179 centimetres, he was probably slightly above average in height, which probably, I reckon, would have had him a little bit tall for a rover in the days, but that was the position he played. And I guess with his just absolute huge fitness advantage, then that definitely worked in his favour. And yeah, this is where the greatest start to a playing career in the elite football competition in Australia opened up. By the end of his first VFL season at only 20 years and a couple of months, Bunton was awarded the Brownlow Medal as fairest and best player in the league. And amazingly, though, Fitzroy only won 4 games and finished in 10th place. However, they were the 6th highest scoring team for that year, which, yeah, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? I guess their defenders probably were still learning the game, or maybe it's slowed down a bit and gotten a bit old. I don't know. So yeah, there's no records of kicks and handballs from that far back, so we don't really know how many he got every week. But we are lucky enough to have goal kicking tallies. And in his first season, Bunton booted 18 majors, with 12 of those coming in the final 6 games. He scored multiple goals on 7 occasions, including 3 in a last round win against South Melbourne. And in Brownlow medal voting, he picked up best on ground 6 times and a second best in the last 7 games. He played 18 games in total and got 26 votes. He polled, sort of okay early on, but those last 7 games he came home like a freight train. And when 1932 rolled around, the status quo just continued. He just picked up where he left off. And he was named captain of the Royals, so he's 20 years old, captaining a VFL team. And I'm not sure why. He may have been injured or some other reason, but he only played 14 of the 18 games. But such was his dominance. He won the Brownlow medal again with 23 votes, which I believe was a pretty high tally at that stage. And this time he was even more consistent, polling in 11 matches out of the 14 he played, and added another 19 goals to his career tally. His best haul was 4 against Hawthorn in round 8. And this was in a day when it was the full forwards kicking the big bags every week, and Rovers were more renowned for just hitting those bigger guys lace out than they were for kicking it through the big sticks themselves. So maybe he was a ball hog, but maybe he's just in better positions than the other guys. Either way, he did pretty well. And he's, again, like 1931, his individual success didn't convert to team performance, with Fitzroy only winning 3 games. And he did, however, add Victorian selection and a Champion of the Colony award to his ever-growing trophy cabinet. And I guess for Fitzroy in that period, it kind of echoes what it was like in, I guess, the late 80s and through to the mid-1990s, when the club had so many really good players, Paul Roos, Ross Lyon, Gary Pert, Richard Osborne, Darren Wheeldon, I could go on and on and on. Brad Boyd in the 1990s, another really great run. Chris Johnson, Jared Malloy. As great as those players were and did go on to be as their careers developed, the club didn't really win a lot of games. It would have the odd season here and there where they might win 8 or 10 games, but generally they weren't doing too well. And that doesn't make any difference, because the people who love the club don't care. They still love the club regardless. So, 2 Brownlow medals, state team selection, and being named the best player in the nation in his first 2 seasons by that stage, the age of 21, and with only 32 games of VFL football under his belt. In my opinion, that dwarfs Nick Dacos and anyone else for that matter considerably. I think maybe Dick Reynolds, who came along a little bit later, played for Essendon. He may have come close, but I think it's pretty clear to see that Bunton's just miles ahead of everyone else at this stage. The only thing he didn't have to show for it was a premiership or even a finals match. So something interesting I found out is that Bunton was receiving £2 per game match payments, which is around $180 in today's money, and that pales into insignificance compared to the 6-figure salaries that most players get these days. I think the average is around $400,000 or something. Even taking into account inflation and everything else, that's still a massive, bigger whack. And I guess if you want to put it into perspective, players in local club footy now, 2024, generally get around a $250 per game mark, and they're not even playing in the most elite league in the country like Bunton was in the day. And I know some of the older folk are going to say to me, well, £2 was pretty good money in the 1930s, and look, it probably was. But for a bloke as good as he was it enough? I don't think so. So we hit 1933, Bunton's 3rd season in the VFL, and that saw a rapid rise up the ladder for Fitzroy with 11 wins and a draw, seeing them just miss out on playing finals. Bunton received 3 Brownlow votes in the draw in round 1 match against North Melbourne. However, it would eventually be his teammate Wilfred Smallhorn, known universally as Chicken, who would go on to win the medal at the season's end. And interestingly, Bunton scored a career best of 24 goals for the season, with another 4-goal haul against Essendon and a pair of 3s against Melbourne and North. And at the end of the season, he was only 6 votes behind Smallhorn in the Brownlow, in a relatively low-scoring affair where 18 votes was enough to win it. So perhaps Fitzroy's greatest success as a club contributed more to Bunton missing a trio of medals in his first 3 seasons than any poor form on his own account. And I mean, look, I'm sure he would have had other teammates, not just Chicken Smallhorn, taking votes off him at that stage. And yeah, look, 1933 may have been the anomaly year, as he was well and truly back to his best in 1934 and 35. And whilst Fitzroy fell back down the ladder with only 6 wins in 1934, Bunton went on a mission, surpassing his previous best by kicking 33 goals. He kicked 5 on 2 occasions against Fitzroy and Essendon, and booted 4 against Collingwood. And that 5-goal game against Essendon netted no Brownlow votes for either Bunton or the eventual winner, Dick Reynolds. While Essendon won by 19 points and their player Bruce Anderson received 3 votes as the best on ground, it was Fitzroy's Horry Dawson and Chicken Smallhorn who got the 2 and the 1. So they must have played some sort of game, all 3 of those guys, to outvote Bunton after a 5-goal haul, and I would imagine Dick Reynolds would have played a blinder as well, given the quality of player he was, and the fact that he had actually won the Brownlow medal that year showed that he was a good player. And something to note about Dick Reynolds winning the medal that year was that he was only 19 years old like Bunton was when he won his first, and he would also go on to win 3 as well. And no one has ever won more than 3 Brownlow medals, so that's a record which will probably never be broken, I would assume. Bob Pratt of South Melbourne set another record that year with 150 goals that has been equalled once by Peter Hudson, and I think Jason Dunstall fell 1 goal short in the early mid-90s. But other than that, no one's got close, and that record will most definitely never be bettered, going on how football's played in these days as well. Back to Bunton though, and 1935 was to be a stellar year for him. I've tried to search for the breakdown of Brownlow votes, but can't seem to find them anywhere. Not even on AFL tables, so not sure what's going on there. And Bunton went on a rampage, kicking 41 goals in 17 games and polling 24 votes to win his 3rd Brownlow medal. He added 8 goals to his tally in a losing side against Collingwood in round 13 and 5 against St Kilda in a round 1 victory. 8 goals for a Rover is just unbelievable. Like, even in the days when blokes were kicking big tallies of goals. Like I said, he wasn't the main man inside the goal square. You know, wasn't a lead up or marking forward or anything like that. He was a rover playing in the middle of the ground. And that's back when positional play was a thing. Let's look at this in isolation now. By the time he was 26, he'd played 83 VFL games, booted 135 goals, won 3 Brownlow medals and been runner-up once. That's simply amazing. And he represented Victoria on 12 occasions throughout his time at Fitzroy, and that was before State of Origin existed. So if you played in the VFL, you just played for Victoria, even though he was from New South Wales. I don't even know if New South Wales had a team back then. Alright, so it didn't end in 1935 though, and Bunton played a further 2 seasons at Fitzroy, kicking more than 30 goals in each despite the club sliding right down the ladder and winning very few games. The magic had on Wayne though, as he kicked goals in 31 of 34 games, scoring multiple goals 22 times. And just coincidentally, another teammate, Dinny Ryan, won the 1936 Brownlow, and Dick Reynolds saluted for his 2nd win in 1937. And it was at this point that Bunton transferred across to Subiaco in the West Australian Football League, which was a fairly common thing for guys to do. I think the money might have been a bit better over in Western Australia, and maybe some job prospects as well. And he had a young family by this stage as well, so the potential to earn a higher income would have been highly appealing to him. And ironically, Subiaco would go on to be known as the Lions, just as Fitzroy would be. And in my lifetime, his son Haydn Bunton Jr. coached them with a great deal of success as well, might I add. And I actually grew up in WA, and that was a Subi supporter. Now, he couldn't get me to swing across as I did choose the East Perth Royals. And that's where Kevin Murray, the great other great Fitzroy man, played during the 1960s for quite possibly financial reasons as well. He did come back to Fitzroy later on, though. And it's worth mentioning that Bunton Sr. continued his dominance by winning 3 Sandover medals, the waffle equivalent to the Brownlow. And then when World War II rolled around, he joined the military and ironically was able to pull on the Fitzroy jumper a further 2 times for 2 goals while he was on service in Melbourne. They gave him a clearance to go off base for a couple of days here and there, and played a couple of extra games. Probably passed his best by that stage, but his worst was probably better than anyone else's best anyway. So overall, at the end of his final days of playing for Fitzroy, he ended up playing 119 games and kicked 207 goals, was captain for 3 seasons, coached for 1, and that was as a playing coach, which was the fashion of the time. He was leading goal kicker twice, club champion twice, and on top of that, he played 72 games for 190 goals at Subiaco and 17 games for 30 goals at Port Adelaide. It's not a bad return either, really. That was probably right at the end of his playing career after the war, I think. And he also coached 53 games at Fitzroy all up and North Adelaide combined, which sadly only won 15 times, but he had a crack, didn't he? He had a go. So, posthumous accolades include legend status in the Australian Football Hall of Fame, selection in the AFL, New South Wales, Fitzroy and Subiaco teams of the century, New South Wales greatest team of all time, and the Ovens and Murray Football League Hall of Fame as well. All unsurpassable accolades in my opinion. He passed away after a car accident in 1954 at the very young age of 44 years old, a year after his wife Lilia died suddenly. Both were taken far too young. And I'll finish up now with this quote from Wikipedia that really sums him up so well, and nothing more will need to be said afterwards. A brilliant runner and ball winner, he was regarded by some historians and observers of Australian rules as its greatest ever player. And in my opinion, that's an accurate assessment, and I'll leave it at that. So thank you for listening, and I will have some more content coming soon on this and also my Brisbane Lions podcast as well, if that interests you. If not, that's fine. I respect that. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.